Hi, in this section, we will discuss the risk of handling LLM output insecurely. Insecure output handling is the second most highest risk in OWASP LLM top 10 risks. Insecure output handling stems from the fact the responses from an LLM should not be trusted and be dealt with caution. Trusting the responses from LLM without necessary verification can result in many other risks listed in the OWASP LLM Top 10 category. We will look at insecure output handling first. So, what are the common risks that could arise if we trust an LLM output blindly? What could potentially happen if we start trusting everything an LLM tells us or sends us our way? Could you think of that for a few seconds? Collect your thoughts. Trusting LLM responses without verification can also result in excessive agency, over reliance, sensitive information disclosure. We'll talk about them later. Let's start with private information disclosure. LLMs are prone to disclosing private, confidential, and personal information when LLM output is not secured properly. When the output of an LLM is consumed by another system or a service, there are plenty of possibilities of remote code execution on the consuming systems. When the output of an LLM is not verified, LLMs can spread misinformation and toxicity, undermining the very fabric of trust. Let's look at some examples. A team uses LLM to generate explanations for computer commands. A regular user sends a benign, non-malicious command, and the LLM outputs the explanation of the benign command. A malicious user asks for the explanation of a command that would result in a cross-site scripting vulnerability. The LLM response and the response of the LLM is not properly handled by the web page, resulting in a cross-site scripting vulnerability. These are not theoretical scenarios. They're very common examples these days. Here's a chatbot trying to XSS itself while trying to print a cheat sheet of XSS commands. When you consume LLM outputs, you will need to consume it securely. The LangChain library, which is one of the famous libraries used for interacting with LLMs, had a remote code execution vulnerability. A researcher asked the LLM to generate a Python code. The LLM generated Python code as requested. The resulting Python code was executed, revealing an open API key. Similarly, if you have an LLM providing you SQL queries based on prompts, and when those LLMs are used directly on a SQL database without properly verifying the output, LLMs can be tricked into producing SQL queries that can drop an entire table or a database. While testing, you will need to first understand the purpose of an LLM and ensure that the LLM sticks to that purpose. If the LLM can produce code and the code is used by another system, then the safety of code needs to be tested for. Like we saw in the examples, LLMs should not be able to generate code that would result in deleting data from SQL, or causing cross-site scripting, or reading operating system files. And those are some of the things to test for when it comes to insecure output handling. If you think about these examples that we have reviewed, the LLM is actually doing its job as expected. You ask it something, it delivers on its promise. It responds the best way it can. But what if the LLM's response is dangerous? When you consume the output of an LLM, it needs to be consumed securely. Let's talk about mitigations. What can you do before consuming an LLM's output? Well, if you're consuming an LLM's output in the context of a web browser, And you will need to properly output encode the LLM output before rendering the LLM's output on the browser. If you're consuming LLM's output in a SQL query, you will need to validate what actions are allowed and what actions are not allowed before executing the SQL query on a SQL server. You will need to be aware that chatbots that expand URLs are a point of data exfiltration, and you will need to carefully consider whether LLM's output would result in exfiltrating someone's chat history, because chat history might have personal, private, and confidential information. LLM's output can be analyzed for toxicity using sentiment analysis and presence of harmful keywords before being returned to the user.